It's a new week and we're back. So coming up on Worlds Asunder.
How do I tell people that this is global? This isn't just happening to this little subsection of people I'm talking about. So I started doing little news stories and little social media comments and little articles at the beginning of every chapter, which was awesome because I could talk about what's going on in Korea, what the UK is doing, what's happening in China.
We've read about far-off lands and adventures of heroes, but how do we elicit those feelings of excitement, tension, and wonder in others?
Creating new worlds in any genre might seem like a daunting task, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every story.
Welcome, weary writers, to the Book Career Network of podcasts.
My co-host is David Shadoin, better known as Shady. It's not just a descriptor, it's also his moniker.
And she's Haley H.Y. Gregor, your friendly post-apocalyptic wasteland elf.
Together, we've got enough published to fill a small shelf, but why should you listen to us? Because we called in some favors.
Our friends and colleagues, some of the best and brightest, join us weekly to bring you tips and tricks for your world building and character development. So, open up your ear holes,
Get out your pen and paper,
and get ready for us to tear Worlds Asunder. So apparently the surprise last week was that we had to take a week off. We apologize, but we're back with Todd, She's a Badass, Part 1. Welcome back to Worlds Asunder, the only world-building podcast, your favorite world-building podcast, giving you 2025 with a slice of alcoholic cherry. This podcast brought to you by Old Fashioned. Thank you.
not a sponsor yet.
Old Fashioned's not a brand.
I was going to say this is going to be a little hard to find that as a sponsor, so if you do, more power to you.
I could probably find a company called Old Fashioned that,
Thank
has
you guys
nothing
for
to do with
killing
the
my
drink.
joke.
Sorry.
You're welcome. I buried that joke right where it belonged. Somebody boo this woman. Speaking of, my co-host, as always, is Haley H.Y. Gregor, coming in hot with the terrible jokes. I am Shady David Shadoin, as always. Turns out I don't really change my name very often, so... but today, we are excited to introduce you guys to, if you haven't heard of her yet, you probably half our audience already has, but she has over 44 titles out. Her urban science fiction, the Kaled Chronicles, the Blood Wars series, and the Twisted Luck series are all out and terrorizing the world. Her upcoming 2025 releases include the Noble's Luck Trilogy, which is a Victorian urban fantasy set in the same universe as Twisted Luck. She is the owner of Badass Publishing. She is working to create a place for excellent stories and great authors. With over 1 million words published, she is aiming for another 1 million in the next 2 years. Badass Publishing specializes in stories that will grab you and make you hunger for more. Currently residing in Georgia with 3 cats who tolerate her. She writes her own version of urban science fiction and fantasy. If you're looking for science, aliens, invasions, explosions, and maybe a touch of magic in some series, you've found your author. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to introduce you to Mel Todd, one of our favorite people. Welcome to the show, Mel Todd.
I feel like I should have a dress so I can curtsy at that introduction, but that would involve A, me wearing a dress, and B, me then falling on my butt, because I'm pretty sure I could not curtsy with any level of grace.
I've seen you wear a dress before, though.
Oh, see, I have not. I was just going to say, I haven't seen you wear a dress yet. I bet you'd look fantastic.
I think at
thank you,
DragonCon.
but no.
I think I have a picture of you wearing a dress at DragonCon.
Maybe, yeah. Probably. Yeah, because I was wearing a dress to the Speakeasy. Not last year, but the year before.
Yeah, okay. I think I've seen that picture now that I think about it.
Burn it now, please.
That's not possible anymore. Thank you.
I'm fine the entire time talking to you. We start talking and recording it, and of course my nose decides to go, oh, I don't like you anymore.
Yeah, it happens.
Normal.
I get sometimes I'll get partway through the intro. So one of the things that, and I don't think I told you this ahead of time, but one of the things I do is I make up the intros, not for you, but our intro into the podcast every week. So Haley has no idea what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm going to say until I start talking. And I'll get halfway through that intro sometimes and just pause. And that's me like, I don't know where to go with this.
It's like, wait, I was supposed to say something else. I have no idea what it should be.
I was supposed to say something clever here. No, so getting back on topic, as much as we love talking to you about all the random bullshit, when you begin world building a totally new project, you have, it's in your bio that you kind of do your own version of urban science fiction and fantasy. Where do you start on something like that? What sparks the idea to kind of go off the trail a little bit?
It actually tends to vary a little bit. Sometimes it's a character. For at least the Twisted Lex series, I'd always had a character who just had weird things happen to her all the time. And so I sit there and I start pulling on the strings. Well, why is the weird stuff happening? What is the weird stuff? How does it happen? How does she affect it? And I keep pulling on these strings and try to come up with justifications for why is this all happening? A good example of it is the Kaled Chronicles. Don't get me wrong, I love shifters, I love werewolves, but there was a spot for about 5 years where every single shifter book was they hide in the darkness searching for their fated mate. And I was just over it. Half of them were really done poorly. Another quarter were simply erotica with fur on it. And then there was a quarter that was really good, but I was still just tired of it. So I went, how can I do shifters without using magic? Okay, so you start pulling on these strings, and I wanted it to be a mutation change, but that wouldn't work. And so I kept pulling and tweaking the idea. And I mean, I actually even completely wrote the first novel, 100,000 words, finished the novel and went, this won't work, and threw it completely away and restarted from scratch. And I finally ended up with nanobots because that was the only thing I could come up with that was a feasible way to do cellular change and have you change shape. Well, okay, we don't have nanobots. Where did the nanobots come from? Well, it has to be higher technology than what we have, which means aliens. Okay, why would it? And it's just, you keep going further and further until you come up where you at least have the majority of your questions answered. There are still some things in my world building where if you got really detailed and asked me, I'd just look at you and say, I don't have the slightest idea. It just works. Because I'm not a geneticist. I'm not a magic user. And sometimes you just have to go because that's what I said it does.
It's the Jedi hand wave.
Yes, it's called hand wavium. Hand wavium happens here.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with hand wavium, right? So long as you don't go too off trail, people, for the most part, will forgive you for that.
Well, I try to make sure that I at least set up a reasonable doubt and a valid reason to give them the suspension of disbelief. So if I just had somebody change and I never gave you any reason why, it starts to fall apart. Because you as the reader are going, okay, well, why did this happen? How did this happen? Etc. So I have to provide you a reason to keep believing the story that I'm telling you. And that's where if your world building doesn't work, everything starts to fall apart because I'm not giving it enough of a foundation. But it's also one of the things I have a lot of fun with. One of the things I did in Kaled Chronicles and in Twisted Luck, which fingers crossed I'd never ever do again because, oh my gosh, I was like, okay, here's this really cute idea. I want to really make this an immersive world. But by definition, when you're storytelling, you really are only following the story of maybe 1 to 5 people. But there's a few crazy people who might do up to 10. But you're talking about a world that can have anywhere from 1 million to 7 or 8 billion or more in our situation. How do I tell people that this is global? This isn't just happening to this little subsection of people I'm talking about. So I started doing little news stories and little social media comments and little articles at the beginning of every chapter, which was awesome because I could talk about what's going on in Korea, what the UK is doing, what's happening in China, what Australia is dealing with. And so I would always remind the reader that this isn't just happening to this person and the people she knows. It's happening to everybody. I did the same thing with Twisted Luck in that I wanted them to understand that this wasn't new. This was something that was very static, but I don't want to do an info dump. I don't want to go, well, as you know, Bob, and have 3 chapters of me explaining how magic works, because so instead I did these little comments at the top, like a research paper of, hey, we discovered this, or the only known example of this is, or this law relates to. And so they were rarely, I think most of them were under 250 words. Some of them were probably under 100. But it helped flesh out the world as I went. Now, it's this super, super cute, awesome idea for one book. By book 6, I was struggling to come up with things to put at the top of each chapter. By book 8, I was asking beta readers, ask me questions, because I've run out of things to tell you. After 8 books in a series with the same characters in the same world, I don't know what you don't know anymore. So but it also made this a much richer and more involved world because you weren't only ever seeing things just through that character's eyes. Now, when it comes to how you build the world, POV has a huge thing to do with it. So Twisted Luck was in first person. So you're never going to see anything outside of how Corey Monroe views the world, which was both really good and really bad because she is going to see, let's say a dog barking and running across the street. She is always going to see, somebody must have called the dog. He wandered away and he's running back to his master. Well, somebody else might see a dog going to charge to attack somebody. Somebody else might see a dog chasing a cat. She viewed the world in a very positive, uplifted way. But that narrows your view of the world because the world isn't always the way one person views it. We won't talk about the reality distortion principle because I'm working really hard on that one. But in third person, it's usually a little bit easier to give a more neutral view of the world, but you still have that filter in there because you're still only going to talk about things that the character notices. So a great example is if you're deaf, I'm never going to mention what sound is because I don't hear it. I might talk about vibrations. I'm going to talk about scents. I'm going to talk about how things feel against my tongue, but I'm never going to tell you what somebody's voice sounds like. But if I'm a musician, that's all I'm going to talk about. Oh, they're singing in an F. Oh, doesn't that sound like the sonata from X? Because that is your life. And that's one of the great things you can incorporate in world building is you turn your passions into part of the world. And if you're really good, I am still working on this, you turn the characters' passions into how they view the world because that presents their worldview to the reader. Again, this is always a work in progress. I don't know any author ever who's ever said that, hey, I know everything how to write. I can't get any better than this.
Well, and that's why we here at Worlds Asunder invite all of the authors. So that way you can get all of the perspectives and figure out what works best for you. All right, I think that was enough of a shameless plug. Anyway, no, but it is an interesting thing, right? Like, funny enough, prior to this, we were talking about the episode we did with the Hollows, and one of the things I talked about was, or one of the things we discussed was whether or not POV was kind of a trope. And it depended on the genres we were getting into. And then you just kind of came in and you're like, well, it may not be the trope per se, but it will drive something that you have to do with your books. And being able to understand that the POV, if you're in first person, you're only going to be able to describe the things that they're going to focus on. And some people that's not always sight. Some people that's going to be smell or taste. But then I was thinking about the kind of the third person close where it's like, there's always that fun little thing you can do right at the end where it's like, but they didn't notice this thing happening just behind them.
See, but it's that head hopping.
It depends. If you have an omniscient narrator, no, because the characters are not telling the story. The person up there playing God is telling the story. And so they get to have fun with that. And that's where you can do a lot more stuff like Chekhov's gun, where the omniscient narrator mentions something that's going to be important. So the reader knows about it. The reader's like, oh my gosh, how can you have not seen that? But the characters have no clue. Is POV a trope? I don't think so. I think POV is a societal change. So if I look back at stories that were done in the 30s and 40s and 50s, almost bar none, they were either distant third person or omniscient. First person really wasn't a thing. However, you still have Mary Shelley, who was writing in first person in the 1800s. A lot of it comes from what people are hungry for. So when you're in the 30s and 40s, you have people who are just out of a war. They're just out of a massive depression. They want to experience a world that they haven't seen. So you're going to do this far distant view so you can show them everything. You can show them the jungles, the cities, the sights, the sounds, all this stuff that they never can get. You move into today's society. We are a very disconnected society. And that's not me talking hot air. That they are literally doing studies on this, that we are very disconnected. And it is getting harder and harder for people to have normal levels of empathy because we are so disconnected. So I think that's part of the reason first person is so popular right now, is it gives you a chance to connect with somebody who doesn't see the world the way you do. And it's one of the few ways, especially given how much of our lives we live online, that you actually get to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Now, it also doesn't work really well with certain genres, but especially for the urban fantasy, the science fiction, and the just straight fantasy, it actually works really well because you get to experience how somebody else views the world with viewpoints you don't have. Now, murder mysteries don't always work that well with it. You usually want that third person because you want to be able to tell them all the reader needs to know all the things the main person isn't seeing. Now, thrillers, they can go either way. You can have a first person thriller where it really becomes more of a Blair Witch Project, where your heart is racing and everything else because the only thing you can see is through that person's eyes. Or you can do it where you're getting to see a lot of the other stuff so you understand consequences. And that's one of the things you miss a lot is you don't get consequences all the time as first person. I can talk a lot, sorry.
Oh,
That's good. Why you're here.
That's why we brought you on. Mel, we want to listen to you. The listeners want to hear your opinions. That's why we brought you here.
But he throws hard.
It's funny you brought mystery thrillers in because... and I'm going to go on a tangent here, and this is now screenwriting and converting books. But the Agatha Christie movies, right? The ones based on her novels, the new Kenneth Branagh's Hercule Poirot. They do those in what is essentially a movie version of first person or very close. Because they have done movies that are actually literally first person. But you only see what he sees. And then you don't get to see some of the rest of it. And he's got to kind of, you have to kind of add up the clues in that. And I've always thought that was kind of an interesting point that you brought up, that in normal thrillers and mysteries, you kind of keep it third person, not too distant, but distant enough that you can see other machinations going on, so that way you can try and solve it before the main character does. So, look at that. We didn't even...
a cat that pushed open the door, and I'm trying to figure out where she is, because I want to close my door, because I'm horrible. I keep my house freezing and my office warm, so when the door's open, all the cold air comes in and washes across me.
Mel Todd, the cat lady. Look, I got to bring the joke back.
Well, and our intro was wrong. Her bio said 3 cats, and she now has 4.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I thought about that as I was saying it, but I was like, I'm not going to correct it until
it comes up, and here it is.
So it comes up again.
I seem to be somebody who is often on the wrong or right end, depends on your view of the cat distribution system. The cats show up, and I am just apparently emotionally incapable of taking them to the pound, so I end up with new cats.
That's how it goes.
You know what? Even when they're expensive, they're still cheaper than kids. So
That
Can
is a true
attest.
statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all right, kind of moving on, because we could do a whole episode on POV, and I might actually.
Oh, yeah.
We might add that to a list of panelist episodes that we do. Hopefully, we're gonna
if
start
you
getting
ever
to some of those
do,
this year.
I will say grab Mona Lisa in for the POV because she is so regimented and accurate about how she keeps the POV that it kind of amazes me. And I try to be good, but I'm much sloppier than she is. She is absolutely nailed down good on it. And she just is. It is one of
Yeah.
her by far strongest technical aspects, and I just admire the heck out of it. But again, I'm apparently lazier than she is. I
Different
don't want to
strengths.
spend 5 months editing.
Based on that remark, I think the rest of us are lazier than that. So, but Mel, do you have any advice for new writers on the best ways to blend science fiction and fantasy?
It depends. Is Star Wars a science fiction movie or a fantasy movie?
It's fantasy.
Fight.
Fantasy.
Honestly, there isn't a difference. It's one of my complaints, and it's one of the things that I dislike the most when writers introduce ourselves, is we always introduce ourselves by genre. And my point of view, either you're write nonfiction or you write stories of wonder. And that's really the only difference, is I'm writing about facts or I'm writing about things that are coming out of my head that are not necessarily always true. There's truth in them, but they're not true. So one of the things that I tell a lot of new writers is genre is marketing. It has nothing to do with your book, except that you need to understand when you finish your book that if you aren't hitting the right tropes, you can't get it marketed as science fiction. So if I write a sci-fi novel about a kid on a planet who wants to go to space, and all he does is wander around the jungle and magically move things with his mind, it's a fantasy. And it's a fantasy because it doesn't have any of the things that a sci-fi reader is looking for. There's no spaceships, there's no technology, there's no outer space, there's no incredible machines that can do things, there's no mechs, there's no anything. Even if really, you might be able to get it with he's crashed his ship onto the planet. But if he never uses any tech except for his magic, it's a fantasy because the tropes are missing. Now, vice versa, most people who aren't authors and don't want to have the argument are going to say Star Wars is a science fiction because it has ships, cool technology, and outer space. The problem is all of the stuff they do, even hand waving, breaks down really hard with how they do it. That's why we get into the whole it's a fantasy. And it also follows the fantasy storyline. The Chosen One comes out, does the whole hero cycle, and that typically tends to be seen in fantasy. Now, it can be done in science fiction. I've seen it done well in science fiction, but most of the time you see that hero's journey as a fantasy thing. So, for a new author who is writing maybe their first 1 or 2 books, unless you have self-esteem of adamantine, and I mean, you can take anything, try to write something that fits the generic tropes the first time or 2. Do the Chosen One, do the prophecy, do the spaceship, do something that you can take your take on, but it still follows the tropes, because people are mean. People are really mean. And it is probably one of the hardest things as an author, that literally you have to take this little piece of your heart and sell it as if it's something that has no meaning to you, and it always has meaning to you. And people are mean. So if you really want to write something off the wall, something that nobody's ever seen, something that transposes all of the tropes, go for it. Absolutely go for it. Write your heart out. Be ready and understand that people are mean. I mean, I wish I could say that people are nice, but no, most people cannot follow the just don't be a jerk. They just can't. But when it comes to writing your story, what sort of story do you want to tell? I will say that I almost purposely go against the common advice because I don't want to tell the stories that are out there. I want to tell something different and something that maybe you haven't seen. Case in point, I'm almost done with epic fantasy. And by epic, I mean I'm at 190,000 words and probably have another 10 or 12,000 to go. This book's taken me a while. But it has no orcs, it has no elves, it has no dwarves, it has no humans. It ended up being a world where you had gods and magic, but each of the gods took their chosen people and mutated them and went, oh, well, I want to tweak you like this. I want to tweak you like that. I want to do this. And the gods are actually there, present in their lives. Some of them live in the palaces. Some of them live, just pop in and out whenever they want. It's got all of the hallmarks of epic fantasy. There's a journey, there's a quest, there is a bad guy to defeat, there are good people striving, there are bad people striving. And I don't remember reading, this does not mean it's not out there, it just means I don't remember reading any epic fantasy that doesn't involve humans in some way, shape, or form, or, the Tolkien sort stuff. And I'm really wondering if I shot myself in the foot.
I mean, to some degree, you have to take risk, right?
Yes.
It's funny that you were like, yeah, as a newbie author, you should definitely stick to the tropes. And the first thing I did, the very first thing I published was fuck the tropes.
Yep.
And it's...
But again,
go ahead.
You would have gotten the comments and, hey, this doesn't, and everything else. If you can handle it, oh my gosh, go for it. But it's really hard on your ego and self-esteem.
Well, and there's the whole very stereotypical, learn the rules before you break them, because then you understand why there are rules. But I don't think for everyone that you have to learn those rules by writing. I think that if you have consumed enough story, you have learned the rules. Yes, and I think there were a lot of exceptions to that theory. But that's one interpretation.
I'm absolutely not saying, oh my gosh, you have to write 50 books that follow all the tropes. No, don't do that. I'm saying that if you want to self-publish and get your stuff out there, or even more if you want to traditionally publish, make sure that for how you are marketing the book that you want to sell, that you are hitting at least some of those tropes that people are expecting. I'll give you an example. God, this is dating myself, but Danielle Steele is and was a huge romance author. She died not that long ago, maybe a few years. I mean, the woman wrote a lot of books. I'm like, I think the number is somewhere over 200 or 300 books. And I'd read a number of them as a teenager, young adult, etc. I picked up one of her books, and I want to say it was Palomino. Note, she is a romance author. Okay? This is a romance novel. At the end of the book, the male main character is in a wheelchair, crippled for life, and the female character walks away and leaves him. And that was the end of the book. And I literally sat there and went, what the? Because I didn't get my happy ending, which was literally the definition of why I am reading a romance, is I want that happy ending. I never trusted her, and I have never read another Danielle Steele after that because she broke the cardinal rule for the genre that I was reading. They didn't end up together, and there wasn't a sequel, because trust me, I was thinking, okay, maybe it's a 2-part and they reconnect. There wasn't. you do that and you lose readers. And that is probably the only, I don't want to say cardinal sin, because there are some people I don't want reading my stuff. I don't care if I lose them. But if you lose the reader that you are trying to get, you have shot yourself in the foot.
When we talked to the Hollows, one of the questions we asked them was how important tropes are. And immediately both of them were like, how much money do you want to make? And it was the same thing. It was reader expectations. If you're writing a certain genre, you can kill yourself. You can shoot yourself in the foot if you violate these certain basic expectations from readers. So there's a good re-emphasis of the point there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And trust me, I actually, Danielle Steele's an author I've never met. I know pretty much nothing about her. I'm not a huge author stalker. It's usually too much effort. But she broke my trust in her. So it meant that I quit reading her. Now, you want another person who I'll read almost anything she's wrote? Jude Devereaux. Oh my God, that woman can rock a story. But she also never betrayed my faith in her. Now, I sometimes do it because I'm not very good at writing pure bad guys. I don't tend to do the big bad really well. I'm trying really hard in this one. And some people don't like the way my book's end because I don't have a yay, we won moment. And I almost never do, because as much as I hate to say it in life, we rarely get those yay, I won. There's no more, everything's done and it's completely over. Example, you graduate college. Yes, you did it. Now you have to figure out how to pay off your college loans. You have to get a job. You have to figure out where you're going to do, because your parents have already changed your bedroom into their spare den. There isn't ever happy, all of my problems are taken care of. And I'm always pointing out that, yes, you solved this one problem, and now all of these other ones have just been created.
Welcome to my arch nemesis, the consequences of my own actions.
That one.
Yeah.
And sometimes the consequences of winning means your life just got a lot harder.
Right. And that's the thing. And it's funny because when Casey is on, I did Companion to Ghost, we kind of did something similar where it was like, yeah, we're having this kind of drinks at the end celebration-ish moment, but there's something worse out there. And they know there's something worse out there. And so it kind of it sours the mood just enough that you're like, oh, yeah, life's not over. It continues. But and I'm with you on that. But at the same time, I've definitely read plenty of books that were like, oh yeah, happy ending. Yay, everything's over. Everything's perfect now. Everything is awesome. Everything is cool when you're part of a team. I'm probably going to get censored for that, but that's all right.
Okay, I have a friend who's constantly saying that to me, and I'm like, you do realize I have never watched the Lego Movie, and the more you say this to me, the less I want to watch the Lego Movie.
That is the reason to watch it, Mel. You of all people should go see the Lego Movie.
I did see Lego Batman. That was kind of cute. We took
those
Jessica's son and took him to see Lego Batman. That was adorable.
Nice. Yeah, no, if you don't see it by the next time we get together, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna watch the Lego Movie.
Oh no!
Yeah,
such a phenomenal.
Actually,
film.
I'm not particularly scared by that threat, because the next time we see each other is gonna be Dragon Con. We have a hard enough time finding time to say hi, much less watch a movie.
That's fair.
Point
That's
to
fair.
Mel.
And that's the end of part 1 from Mel Todd. We hope you enjoyed discussing POVs with us, as well as rehashing out some of the trope talk, and hope you learned a little something about how she helps build out her world for her readers. We'd also like to extend an apology to Miss Danielle Steele for wrongfully assuming that she had died. She has now 210 books, with her 210th coming out this month, back on January 2nd, I believe. Thanks to Book Career Network and Nick Thacker for hosting us. As always, you can find our links in the show notes. Make sure you go check out She's a Badass Part 2 next week with Mel Todd. And it'll be Part 2 of 4. So get up for it. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a share. Let your friends know that we exist. And as always, thanks for helping us tear the worlds asunder. And we'll see you next time.